Take two. Hello and welcome to the after party. Your hosts are Mr. George and I am the other guy. The Honors Roll Call highlights and celebrates those who have conscientiously committed to monthly subscription investments in my work for White Wellbeing. And appearing on the All Stars portion on the Honors Roll Call today are Charlie, Shaxor, and the fantastic Final Blossom. And those remaining on the Honors Roll Call are Leah, Scott, Capo, Susie Penguin, Jim, Stephen, Ohesian, Goofy Grape, White Healing, Cliff, JP, Happy Cat, and the great DB Cooper. I warmly appreciate your support, and I'm grateful that there are people like yourselves who are driven by a scintillating character and sense of destiny. And now a little mention to all of this channel membership business going on. You will notice that I think it's nearly 20 folks have signed up for channel membership here on No White Guilt, and you will see their names in green. Now, we are working, especially the great Seaver Hamlin, on some instructions on how to become a channel member without having to give Google and YouTube your private details. So if you're interested in being able to become a channel member without having to communicate those details to the Google monster sitting on your shoulder, we will have those together. I think also Roy had a suggestion by way of Apple Pay if you are on Apple and iOS or what have you, and you have also, I think it's Pink Socked, came across a way to also do this. We will all be getting together. We will have a conversation and put together some instructions so that you, if you don't already have a Google membership and you would like to keep yourself anonymous from the Google monster, will have a means by which you too can become a member of this channel. Your name will be in green and you will have a little badge that will appear beside your name. And that badge is an Eindelen. And that is the image that is on the front, the diamond-esque shape. It's technically a tetragonal trapezohedron in geometry that you see on the cover of Go Free. That image and that symbol has great meaning in the story of Prometheus Rising. And the longer you are a channel member, the darker that badge will become, distinguishing you from those who are brand new members, until it reaches its full coloration. Now, as a member, you will also have access to the best part, probably, of the whole membership activity, which is going to be a community activity, and that is member-only emojis. As you all create emojis, submit them to me if I like them and they seem to jibe with or serve White Wellbeing and they are no threat to the channel. We will implement them, and then members will be able to use those emojis during the live chats, and I believe in the threads as well. So looking forward to that. Finally, as a member, you will also have access to private messages from me on YouTube by way of the community tab, as well as pictures or maybe any videos that I might make for members only. But primarily the purpose of the channel membership is just to give another element to the community that we are building here, something else to distinguish those in the community and to have some fun here. And looking forward to those emojis that you all put together. I hope to see them soon. Now, as for the Super Chat crown winner of last week, the crown goes to, I'm glad he's here, the redoubtable Roy Danton for investing a total of $260. The sky is the limit for White Wellbeing dollars. Fibonacci series, adulations and salutations to you, dear sir, and a heart-warmed thank you. In second place was Frank Pliskin, or Plisson, that's probably Swedish, investing $143. Congratulations to you, and thank you also. Super Chat on YouTube at 30%, on Entropy, which I will have up and running in a moment, at 15%. where you can also watch this stream. You can vote on questions, ask questions in the questions widget, participate in any polls I post. I may post some. We also have Ko-fi at 15% and the familiar alternative at 6%. Jared and I, of course, evenly share the Super Chats that you donate here on the after party with our guests. Today, once again, Jared and I are tag team talking to Daughter of Albion from the YouTube channel of the same name. Daughter of Albion, or Sarah, as she is known in the Hobbiton-like corkscrewing catacombs of book conservation, is a book conservator and former lecturer in the Victorian literature, and currently working on restoring damaged manuscripts. On her YouTube channel, she produces sophisticated and thought-provoking material, and I will now pass it over to Jared to begin the tapping.
It's tea time. Hello. How is everyone? And Jason, it sounded like you were referring to a third host, me and the other guy. That was a little mysterious. I don't quite know what that was about. Well, Sarah, welcome, and we're going to do this time. Some of you may remember we had some tech issues 2 weeks ago, so we made sure to get Sarah back very, very quickly. And since we were only about 10 minutes into that, we'll begin at the beginning. So we're going to talk about a whole host of things. Sarah has a wonderful channel that touches on many different topics and moods, and a lot of people appreciate it. As you know, she's been making the rounds. But Sarah, welcome. And why don't you, just as a bit of framing and background, tell us a little bit about your time in academia and how that slowly transformed into the kind of work you're doing now and what you're concerned with now.
Well, thank you so much for having me back. It's so nice to speak to you again. I'm ever so sorry about what happened last time.
No, it happens.
Believe it or not, it was I realised that was stopping me coming back on. So something very simple I should have known how to deal with, but there we are. So it's lovely to be back speaking with you. So yeah, just as Jason has said, really, I spent quite a long time as a lecturer. I was teaching English literature and philosophy, and I was very lucky. I really loved it. It was a wonderful job, and I really can't fault how nice it was to earn money just for teaching literature, really. From there, I mean, I ended up sort of getting into book conservation really just from just because the opportunity opened up to me, and I ended up really liking the actual proactive conservation element. So I'd love to go back to teaching someday as well, but I think, as most people know, the universities are quite sort of little honey traps now for very radical left-wing Marxist sentiment. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. So I think I got out probably just at the right time. I was sort of there just before the storm really set off and these came into existence. So I was quite lucky with that.
Were you feeling any pressures when you were still there towards anti-white sentiments?
Oh, absolutely. Unfortunately, that's always been there. I mean, it's always been a very left-leaning sphere. I never necessarily minded that if I thought that at least we would never go so far as aggressive censorship. But unfortunately, that did materialize. But yes, anti-white sentiment is it's rampant. But it's one of those things that's so, funnily enough, I suppose you just grow up used to it, and it takes a while for you to really recognize that that's not a normal part, I think, of a social contract or conversation. So I probably hadn't noticed it for a very long time until it became sort of too excessive and violent-minded to ignore. So yes, unfortunately, that has always been there. Yes.
Do you think there's a chance that you would be able to go back to teaching what you're doing now?
If I could, if they would have me, I'd love to, but I think I'd certainly have to sort of toughen up. I think I'm a bit fragile for it. You've got to be pretty tough to cope with all these lefties. So I've had some good experience with that, but I think I'd probably just wither and melt. I'm not sure I'm really cut out for that. Maybe, Jared, I don't know, maybe.
What was it that attracted you? I mean, there's obviously a through line that continues in the types of videos you make now. Was there something implicit, or do you think it was, how conscious was it of your celebration of Britishness, being English in particular? Did you have a love of that and a recognition of that from when you were a little girl? Was it something you were conscious of, or was it more just there, but you couldn't even really articulate it?
No, I think, funnily enough, it's one of those things that it only comes to be something self-conscious when it's under threat. I think it was Samuel Johnson who said that it's possible for nations to exist for centuries in kind of unreflective silence, is what he said. So you can have, the spiritual essence of a national life can exist without the members of that nation necessarily being aware of its presence. It's only really now it's become threatened that I think a lot of people are starting to have a much more hyper-vigilant, sort of hypersensitive awareness of what that means, and really that's because it's in contrast to this imposing other that's sort of unceremoniously elbowing its way into our culture. It sort of prompts this kind of cycle of reassessment, I suppose, because you take it for granted, which is good in one way because it means that you're comfortable. You don't necessarily have a keen sense of identity until it's under threat. So no, probably not until the last sort of 5 or 6 years. That's probably sparked a more ready interest in identity, I'd say.
Right. But personally, were you attracted to things that are very steeped in your culture and your heritage, your literature from a very early age? Was it something you were just sensitive to?
Oh yeah, I think I'm probably just one of those very booky people. I don't know why that is. Probably just being a child surrounded by books, and it's difficult not to love. I think because obviously being English, this is the soil on which the English language grew from, and so I think the English, whether they know it or not, whether the English are big readers or not, doesn't necessarily matter. Even the manuscripts themselves and the texts you can see them as kind of epitaphs of identity. So English citizens have a strong consciousness of, for instance, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, whether they know it or not, whether they've read it or not. Really, because it's where you see the first transition from Latin and French into the English-speaking language that the world over now knows and uses. So yeah, I think it's probably just a natural part of it being our birthright and collective inheritance in England. Yeah.
Right. I mean, you being attracted to books, there's always a constellation of personality traits because, as we well know, in a lot of our people, because of a certain tendency towards openness in a fair number of our people, I could have went the other way and had you looking more at more exotic, fetishizing more exotic cultures and literatures. Did you go through a phase where you kind of held other cultures above your own in the way some of our people do, or did you always kind of have this home base sense with your British identity?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think all English people probably, to some extent, whether rightly or wrongly, have a slight sort of chauvinism about the fact that it's the land of Shakespeare and Chaucer. But my doctorate was actually in German Romanticism. I still am really a bit of a Germanophile in terms of literature, but of course, I wouldn't necessarily see that as a kind of exotic, distinct other either.
I meant non-European. I meant
No, I don't think they ever
non-European,
have.
non-white.
No, I don't think they ever have. Mostly because I don't, and I no disrespect to other cultures, but I think probably because the print press was invented in Europe, they just don't have the same kind of literary corpus as we do. There are some very lovely, beautiful works, Japanese haikus, or I know on your program before you've talked about with previous guests, I think the Dao De Jing and the Shuangzi. Those are all really lovely, beautiful texts, but I've never had any real kind of, aggressive passion for them, I must admit, and quite insular in that way. So no.
Now, you mentioned something a few moments ago that was interesting about self-reflection, a culture's self-reflection, and how it's more an artifact of the modern age that we're now in touch with each other and we're dealing with all this mass movement of people. But particularly for Britain, do you think that the empire caused them to have more of that sense of self? Because even before mass transit and the digital age that we live in today, the very fact of the British Empire being all over the world did have them more than other European cultures coming up against these non-white, non-European cultures.
Well, yeah, mostly because, funnily enough, you get a very good sense of what it means to be British when other cultures tell you what it means, because they're in this habit of saying, well, this is not us. You are distinct from us in this sense. So I've actually learned a lot of what it means to be British from a lot of anti-colonial essays. For instance, Gandhi writes quite significantly, very well and very articulately on what it means to be English, because of course it's not Indian. And when you're constantly coming up against that difference, you grow a kind of a sharper sense, I suppose, of what it means to be, I suppose, a part of very particular institutions that are only born from the English soil, not from a universal one. So it's really the British had to learn the hard way. We tried to be universal, but we weren't wanted. And in many ways, that's given me a much keener sense of why it's important to be a nation of people as opposed to a sort of universal communal, because other people don't like it either, funnily enough. So.
So in your circles, when you were a teacher, you did a PhD. Obviously, you're traveling in circles of very intelligent, educated people. What were your peer relationships like? Were your friends around your age group, did they have similar feelings, or were you kind of the odd person out in feeling more of this pride for your heritage, coupled with not having the guilt we're supposed to have under the current regime?
Oh no, I definitely would say that it's very unusual to be a conservative, and I don't say that with any pride. I take no sort of pleasure in it, because it's actually a very hostile lifestyle. But it's not something. I mean, I think a good teacher obviously would never try to impose their politics on students. So I always had a very good relationship with my students. But in terms of peers and colleagues, that's probably where real hostility comes from, because of course there's a great emphasis on diversity quotas and quote unquote inclusivity. And at one point, this was starting to interfere with the syllabus. We were being told, well, we want to get rid of the male white authors because there aren't enough people of color on the module. And of course, you're in this sort of situation where you have to say, yeah, but they're not very good poets or writers. So, but it's a difficult one. So you have to be brave in that sense. But yes, there's a lot of hostility. And no, I'd say I probably was one of maybe a small handful of people that was more conservative, but that's quite common in universities to be one out of tens or hundreds, I think. So yeah, but I did also think, well, if I left, then there'd be no conservatives left. So you kind of feel more compelled to stay for that reason, I think, in many ways. Mm-hmm.
Have you lost friends because of your views?
Oh, undoubtedly, unfortunately, yeah. I mean, try not to be antagonistic, of course, because friendships are very important to me, and it's horrible to lose friends, particularly over politics. But there are also things in life which are non-negotiable to me, and one of them is population replacement of my people. That's not something I'm willing to negotiate over. So yes, unfortunately. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And this is a great example. If I could just jump in really quickly, it's a great example of what I said, especially when it comes to teaching. We've talked about this exact thing with, I think it's Brand Danger, that you have folks who care about our people, they care about our countries, they care about Western civilization, they care about our people globally, and then they end up self-selecting themselves out of these professions. So it is not this idea. It's just this gross misunderstanding about this. They refer to it as the march through the institutions. They marched through the institutions by taking over the institution, then hiring the people that they wanted to be in charge. And then those who had opinions, like our wonderful guest here, daughter of Albion, they self-select themselves out. It happens in a great variety of government jobs, but also, of course, in tech as well. Brilliant people end up selecting themselves right out of it because they cannot stand it. So I just wanted to make sure that we mentioned this as an artifact of an anti-white environment. People on the outside, they end up looking in. They do this with pretenders, and by that I mean actors, musicians. They do this with professors. They do this. They end up looking and saying, wow, all of the bright or the talented or the creative folks, they're all anti-white. So it must mean, no, they're anti-white because those are the only ones that will stay there. The bosses want the anti-whites there. The good people can't stand the anti-whites that are there, and they leave.
That's absolutely true. It's a very good point. And sometimes you've got to push yourself to stay, I think, because you think, God, I'll never cope and flourish there. But of course, I mean, like can attract like. So we have to also be careful not to allow them to consume the academies. But as you say, Jason, sometimes it's self-selecting, and I don't want to be able to give that to these radical marks. Mm-hmm.
This was the question I was asking you when the tech gods frowned upon us last time. So hopefully we'll be able to weather this storm. And with respect to the fact that these kinds of things, ultimately, it's a lived experience. So words only go so far. But what would you say to the person who asks, what is the quintessence of being English?
Oh, the $1 million question, Jared. Well, I think to be English, I suppose, means to be either the heir or heiress to a common inheritance. So that inheritance are the customs, the characteristics and institutions that have ultimately borne forth on the English soil. So I like to think of it as being, as I say, an inheritance, to see yourself as heir or heiress to that. So for me, predominantly, I suppose our greatest inheritable treasure would be our English language, which of course is sort of consecrated in the great masterpieces, first and foremost of Chaucer. It's the language, the law, the processes by which we as a people have come into being over many centuries. I think there are specific and unique traits to Englishness. Oftentimes we hear people ask, what does it mean to be English? And they sort of suggest, well, it's constantly changing, it's constantly in flux. But I think there are sort of fixed traits. The first of which is that we're an island nation, which means we've always been a sort of seafaring people. People forget how particular that is to our identity. I nearly said aquatic people, I meant seafaring. Obviously English common law, which comes from the Magna Carta, that nowhere outside the Anglosphere, so far as I'm aware, shares that, apart from America, of course, which is why England has always had a good relationship with America. The crown, for better or for worse, class, for better or worse, the emergence of a gentry and a nobility, and also our the natural landscape, so the fells, the Lake District. All of these are sort of self-contained, but I think the fact we're an island nation is always very significant, something people forget. It means that we've been sort of immune from any of the fashions or tendencies of the continent. Not immune, but maybe slightly distinct from. So yeah, I suppose, I don't know if that's a good answer or not. It's a good question.
No, it's a brilliant answer. And if I could very briefly, before passing it back over to Mr. George, I wanted to point out that what you started with and what you were speaking to directly, as you were saying, you were giving these reasons of the quintessence of what it means to be English. You were really talking about something from antiquity, even if that's not that far back, but something of the past that hands down to you a dignity that you feel in the marrow of your bones. This is the exact thing that gives our people and any individual immense strength, immense power when they recognize and embrace this, putting the lie to folks like Jordan Peterson, who want you to disassociate yourself from the accomplishments of your people, to be just this individual that floats in the middle of this sea of nothingness, and therefore be a nothing. Now, if an individual of a Westman of any of our countries can take great pride in the accomplishments of our people, Western kind, in that country, try to begin to imagine what it's like for me and for people like Mr. George, who take pride and derive dignity from the accomplishments of all of Western kind. That was when I was in junior high school, when I truly realized, I mean, it hit me like a bolt of lightning thrown from Zeus himself. I could not believe. I thought, this is all of my people, not just what has been done in America, but what has been done in the UK, what has been done in France, what has been done in Italy. It is all my history.
You spoil, yeah.
Yes. And I tell you, it's because of owning that history, owning that people, owning that accomplishments of our people, that I know there's nothing in the world that I cannot do, that we all cannot do. Because we have walked on the moon, for God's sakes. You don't have to have been an American to, if you are a member of Western kind, that was the first step for Western kind. It wasn't mankind on a foreign planet, on another planet in space. We did this. And if we can do it, you can be an Australian or whatever it might be. That is your people that did this, and you can do anything as a consequence. So I just wanted to point out, because there's so many folks who really buy into this this new repackaged hyper individualism of folks like Mr. Peterson, where he might be right in some areas, but this hyper individualism is grotesque and would have robbed you, Sarah, if you believed in it, would have robbed you of everything you just said about what it means to take pride in and be a person of English descent. And how wicked would that have been to deprive you of that? So I pass it back. And Sarah, if you have any comments you'd like to make to that, and then we'll get to Jared George's next comment.
Well, it is very tempting, I think, particularly when you're a teenager, to be this sort of radical individual. I mean, obviously, a lot of what I studied was Nietzsche, who is more of a sort of, he's obviously an existentialist. So it's I think also part of the European character is quite insular. So it's a difficult, we have to sort of push ourselves sometimes to be more ethnocentric and have a much clearer sort of, we also have to kind of sometimes articulate to ourselves what it means to be part of a folk. So the units which make up the total of a commonality. But it's, I mean, you're lucky really being American, because I suppose I've never thought of that. You have a little bit of everything over there in terms of Europe, and but also your own idiosyncratic character as well. But you're right. It is. That's why I quite like thinking of it as an inheritance. Even with its ugly and vulgar parts as well, they're still ours. It's all part of being our inheritance in our own home as well.
That's right. And no one else gets to tell us what to do with it or what it means.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
A few things. You mentioned we're in a cycle right now where I think, for whatever reason, many reasons, we've gotten to this point, and we need to, as you mentioned, re-articulate what it means to be us. And perhaps there's just times when there's an ebb in that, and we're at a particular point where we need to shore that up again. Given what Jason said a moment ago, and it's something that comes up on various shows of ours, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I don't quite know. I know Jason well enough, and Jason, please pop in. I don't want to speak for you, but I don't quite know if he was saying it strictly because we are Americans, in the deeper sense of, and this is something I'm just starting to learn more about myself. So please understand that. But when you watch something like Asher Logos's videos, I've been getting more into his Our Subverted History series. It's wonderful, wonderfully done. Or you think of the recent Survive the Jive video about how they've found mummies in what is now parts of China.
Yeah.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
Blonde or red hair. Is that, yes, there are different meanderings. We're a far-flung people. We travel, and in terms of maybe the more recent history that we know of in the nation states of Europe, of course, there are differences in our character. We're very dynamic and multifaceted. So even though there are many Germanic elements in England, the English and the continental Germans are still very different in certain ways. And we know all that. And no one, or at least not us here, we're definitely not those types of Americans that just want to whitewash over that, pardon the pun. But you very much are part of that heritage too. We are these people who, in a broader sense, they're branches, but the trunk of the tree, we are still these people who, whether they went and settled some kind of far-flung outpost in China, and that's why we're finding thousands and thousands of year-old mummies there with red and blonde hair, or it's the people who stayed in Europe and congealed into the tribes that became the nation states that we know more of from our more recent history. We are still all of that same trunk of that tree. We are these people with these light features. That's just one marker among many. But we are all that as well. And I say that I'll ask a question in the spirit of that. And that is, you mentioned that you studied, for example, a lot of German literature and philosophy. So do you feel, was that just a point of intellectual interest, or do you feel there's something deeper there that was calling in your spirit that there, like, what is, as someone who's English, obviously England, as I mentioned, has a lot of Germanic elements, the Anglo-Saxons and so forth. What are your feelings or connections to related peoples on the continent?
Well, I always really liked Roger Scruton had a really nice way of putting it. He said it's about considering yourselves as a first person plural. I think that's a really nice way of considering it. So I suppose it's the idea that our being is sort of already involved ontologically, and I don't know. I mean, we talked about. So you asked about German literature, and as I've mentioned, I quite like Wagner and Nietzsche. And Nietzsche talked about literature as being, or German literature at least, a wanderer's attempt to come home. And I really like this idea of, I suppose for me, a lot of German literature, because it's very romantic in its style, the culmination of the romantic tradition and Weimar classicism is very much situated in what's local, I suppose. So the shared settlement, rather than just seeing the continent as a temporary transit camp, like a lot of newcomers do. It's a shared settlement, which.
Jason, do you still hear her?
Oh, do you not hear? Can you?
I hear you. Yes. Yeah.
I can. Are you sure? Can you, Jared? No.
Jared, can you hear me?
We can't. We can't hear you.
Jared's muted right now, and I have not muted. Let me type him really quick. Please continue with what you were saying.
I think I'm back. I got nervous that Sarah jumped off again, but maybe my computer had a glitch.
You glitched. Oh, so third time lucky. Jason's turn next.
It just left off. It just left off for me when you were talking about the German literature, talking about celebrating the local.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I suppose for me, it's difficult to explain why I like the German so much. I think because I find the German language particularly beautiful in this period. And I loved all of the very kind of nature-based material that was coming out of Hölderlin and Schiller and Goethe. Probably just that magpie part of my female brain that loves everything romantic and fairy tale castles and, sort of all this kind of old German folklore of princesses and knights. It's very kind of Arthurian romance, really.
I like that too.
I suspect that's probably what it is that female part of my brain.
You don't have to be a girl to like that. That captured my imagination since I was a boy too.
Yeah,
it's a very beautiful part of that. History. So I think because Germany in particular is very good at emphasizing the archetypes of folk tales. Not all European nations are, but I'd say Germany uniquely. Why that is, I'm not sure. I suppose it's the kind of Bavarian landscape is quite susceptible to that. So I like that. I suppose also because I liked English Romanticism. A lot of the lake poets actually used to go over. So Wordsworth and Keats and Shelley, they used to go over in Germany in a place called Göttingen was the kind of hub, the central hub for all these kind of romantic literati, and they'd go and sort of rub shoulders and boast about their relative poetic accomplishments. But so Germany is really a kind of birthplace of a lot of the romantic phenomenon. In fact, a lot of that actually went to America in the transcendentalist movement with Emerson, and I'm sure you know a lot of those paintings are beautiful. Yeah, so I suppose that's its kind of birthplace, really, is Germany.
Undoubtedly. I've traveled there and I felt it in me, the stirring in me.
Yes, the stirring.
It all comes to life. You're fluent in German? You've studied the German language?
Yeah, I can read and write it very well. I think I'm probably a little bit rusty, a bit out of touch with the conversational after a couple of years. I'm sure it's kicking around there somewhere.
Somewhat related to the last question, have you traveled to any of the other Anglophone nations? Particularly, have you been over here to the States across the pond?
I have been to America. I went to Boston 2 years ago. Apart from that, I've only been there once to Disney when I was 10. I've been to Australia. My brother was there for a short time when he was in the Navy, and so I've been very lucky. And they're all gorgeous. They're all strangely sort of they're familiar to me in a peculiar way, because I guess it's can I say my people without sounding sort of sentimental? Yeah. But I do like how the landscapes have really kind of sculpted you, particularly America. I love all the kind of Americana, Steinbeck and Salinger and Hemingway. You seem to have got your own, particularly in terms of literature. I think Americans have really nailed their own sort of literary format, which is very distinct from English and couldn't have been, I think, recreated in any other part of the world. So you should be very proud of that. I like how it's sort of blossomed in different ways, depending on the climate.
Favorite kind of tea?
Favorite kind of tea? Oh, probably just Yorkshire tea, like I'm doing a Laura Towler there. I do like any kind of northern tea, or Earl Grey, of course. How about you? Then? What are you drinking there, Jared? I can see you with tea.
It's an English breakfast blend.
Oh, lovely.
I have to try Yorkshire tea because I keep hearing about it from Laura, and I'd imagine it's somewhat I mean, it's a black tea, and they all have similarities, right? I don't know what particularly. I don't know if I've ever had Yorkshire tea. If I did, I can't remember.
I think it's just one of these things that when you've had it, it's difficult to go back. It could be the pretty packaging I quite like as well. I don't know. Local packaging. But it's very tasty. I do
particularly like English breakfast, so it'll be hard to unseat it. Earl Grey is good, but it's a little lighter. I think Earl Grey is better for the afternoon. English breakfast, like its name suggests, kind of a little more of a punch. It's good for the morning.
Is it easy? I mean, it's a silly question. Is it easy to buy tea over there? I don't know.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Great variety of tea.
It's not got like sugar in it or anything.
No. I mean, both of us here are in health and wellness, so I look for no sugars and all natural stuff. We're all about that here. So we could switch gears a little bit because I know that you seem to be outspoken about support for men, and sometimes we come across this kind of divide, and we know some of it, a fair number of it is from trolls and bad actors, but still. There are definitely some wounds and chasms that need to be healed around the relations between the sexes. So I'd like to start hearing from you about what drove you and why to speak out about supporting men and what that means to you.
Well, I think for me, I always feel very self-conscious and really embarrassed by the language around men. You know, I'm not a sort of it's not that I'm a sort of a gender traitor, as I've maybe been called before. I think for me, I always remember studying World War I poetry in school and seeing some of the old British Pathé clips about soldiers who had come back with what they then called shell shock. And that's always really traumatized me. I haven't seen the footage in years, but it was so painful and heartbreaking to see these young men who were just a whole generation wiped out. And strangely, in Britain, that's still very much on the psyche of the British is what they call the Great War. And I suppose it always felt peculiar to me to speak about men. You know, women often talk about men as though women were just objectified, but then men have always been sort of treated as disposable. And you know, I have a dad, I have a brother, and I'm very close to. I always love my grandpa. So I suppose it's just healthy male relationships, you know. I don't know what I'd do without my dad. He's my best friend. And it's, I suppose it's just having a natural, healthy, I actually like men, you know. I think the way that they are spoken about and treated is absolutely appalling. And it's not because I'm sort of trying to win brownie points with them. I think it's just dreadful to I know that there's very high suicide rates among white men, and I think they probably just need to hear a little bit of love probably and support, because you know they're our men after all, and they built our wonderful nations we dwell in. So I'm very lucky that I can inherit that. So it's just a very natural sort of, I just don't mind them, and I think it's horrible to speak about them the way that we've become sort of used to hearing about it, in those tones, you know, of hatred. I don't know how bad it is in America as well, but
bad.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? I don't know where it comes from. Yeah,
it's anti-whiteism.
Yes,
it's just another element of anti-whiteism to drive this wedge between the men and women so that we can't have normal, functioning, healthy relationships. We can't find healthy partners with which to start families. We can't have healthy families because once we get together to have a family, we're at each other's throat all the time. And it is indeed, they say things like this, totally ignorant. It makes no sense whatsoever for there to even be a gender traitor. It is nonsensical as it could possibly be, and clearly as a consequence, nonsensical when we are looking at things from the perspective of what is healthy and best for men and women and our children and our community, our people, and therefore that feedback loop that ensures that we as individuals are healthy and strong and able to thrive in environments that are composed of by our people. So saying something like a gender traitor is as though you are going to elevate, which is many of them have done, many anti-whites have done, elevate a particular gender above the other one. And notice how I said there that there was another one. What did we say earlier too about, oh yes, the mummies? I just want to make sure that for the YouTube censors that are watching, All of that news may or may not be true. It may or may not be true that there are only 2 genders. That is for you all to read about, for you all to look in. Go to your doctor, ask your doctor about that sort of thing. You can even ask your doctor about the mummies if you like.
Look, I'm a red bearded mummy come back to life.
Yes,
So
indeed.
I'm evidence of it right here.
Nothing we say here could
You've
possibly.
aged well, Jared.
He has indeed.
A lot of creams and green tea.
It's the biospirit that he serves that has kept him young all of these years. But
serving our people does keep you young and vital. It's true.
Well,
And indeed. Well, I always, speaking about that, what was it? Lady Michelle Renouf. Look at this woman. She was a stunner.
Yes.
Well into senior years. So, and then look at Laura from who works on Nat Connect with Way of the World and does moderating here when she is free as well. She's a knockout at her age. So
all these European babes.
Serving White Wellbeing, serving the White Spirit keeps you beautiful and healthy.
I do think there's something. I do think there's something to that. Seriously, if you love yourself and you have purpose, that is going to keep those vital energies moving, and people sense that. People sense that vitality.
Absolutely.
That well-being manifests itself. So, do you get? Jason made a great point a moment ago about, and nothing against what you said, but it's edifying to point out that we shouldn't even be thinking in terms of gender traitor, and it's just an artifact of what's gone on. The war they're trying to get to wage against us. I myself have been accused of being a feminist or whatnot because apparently I don't hate women, and I sometimes try to see things from their side, and I don't think that they should just shut up about everything because what we're doing here is not just politics, it's culture, it's everything. So if a woman wants to share perspectives about motherhood, or a woman has education like you do in literature, there are many ways that all of us, can contribute. You seem to have a pretty good comment section from what I've seen, but do you encounter this kind of vitriol and toxicity where saying, what do you know? You're a woman. You shouldn't be.
Oh my gosh, all the time. Yeah, I actually get a lot of messages in my inbox about that. Yeah.
Really?
Well, I'd say one I see most often is, well, this is the world that you women wanted, therefore good luck, because this is what you asked for. And I must admit, I do sympathize with that to some extent, because I know that feminism has very much been at the forefront of inviting in this sort of open borders world, which is an absolute nightmare and a travesty. So I do, to some extent, sympathize, I would say. I understand why a lot of men have found themselves disappointed, angry, and maybe feel that women have been very disloyal to them. And so I suppose in many ways, I do get some men say, why are you having a channel? You should be breeding. I mean, I guess you can do 2 things at once, right? But on the other hand, I think, well, if the general sentiment with a lot of national, and it does actually come from more right-wing men, I'd say, is well, this is the world you wanted, therefore don't look to us to help you women out when you see all these invaders coming in. I guess I sort of thought, well, maybe it is just up to women to do something and try and reverse the mess they've made. It's a very confusing.
Well, look, it always depends on how you look at it. I've gotten angry messages too that the men are the protectors and we allowed this because we didn't protect and we didn't do our duty. And you can always kind of freeze a point in history or just cherry pick one part of the story and say, okay, that's the sole reason, not look at the holistic relationship of everything and therefore lay it at this or that group's feet. It goes back to what Jason just said. It's just a way to divide us. I know people out there are angry, and I certainly don't think that every single person who writes these kind of nasty messages is a saboteur and is a plant. I mean, there are genuinely people in our spheres that do feel this way, and that needs to be addressed. And we try to be a kind of influence that slowly, surely brings people to a more balanced perspective. We're hoping to do that here. I understand that people have a lot of pain, and that's all right. But any kind of movement or whatever you want to call it, any kind of when there's a social setting, there you will get these tropes that kind of form, and it's exaggerated even more so in this day and age of social media. And I see it all the time, and it's something we have to be out on the lookout for. And just cookie cutter responses, and I just cut people off now and I say, I'm going to say this, and now you're going to call me a cuck or a white knight because that's your cookie cutter response. That's your paint by numbers response. Congratulations, you've let Twitter do your thinking for you. I know not everyone is designed to take a step back and always be looking at every angle. Maybe we're up here doing this because we're more those types of people. And that's all right. Everyone has a role to play. I'm not saying one is even better than the other. But you need this kind of ecosystem of different personality types and strengths to make the whole thing work. But we do need to make sure that the peanut gallery doesn't take over, because a lot of this has been, even if the people who are saying these things aren't subverters themselves, they're being led by subversive forces. You mentioned feminism. Feminism was introduced by, as far as we know, most of the evidence shows, an outside group, and it was under an umbrella of more anti-white sentiment. As Jason said, I had someone who does a lot of research on this tell me that you look at feminist classes and they lament the fact that you look at female voting patterns, and most of the women voted the way their husbands still did after women got the vote. And that some of it could be more laid at the feet of people who were enfranchised, who didn't have as much skin in the game, who didn't own property, the lower classes getting votes. So, because we see all of these videos made, well, once feminism started, then, inevitably they voted social programs and it goes down. And I mean, there's something, I'm not saying there's not something to investigate there, but there's always a little bit more to the story. And that's what I mean about these cookie cutter paint by numbers kinds of approaches to all of these things. And there's just anger. There's just projection. There's just pure personal projection. For someone to go out of their way to inbox somebody who's getting up and just, you studied literature and philosophy and you're sharing, that doesn't mean that you could go have 10 kids. Doing a YouTube video once or twice a week and doing some live streams doesn't preclude you from that.
Of course, no.
It's ridiculous.
It's called, in Going Free, we call that virtue trapping. They want to say, you've got to do this one thing that you consider virtuous and nothing else. And they want to do that because they want to undermine your effort to serve white well-being. Women have, and men as well, have done a great many things at a single time. I know I'm doing a great many things at one time, juggling many balls at one time. But yeah, this idea that all the women, this is what I made a video about last year, wasn't it, Jared? Where I talked about virtue trapping. In fact, I made that up while I was driving the car talking about the subject. And that is, it's used for men as well, that, you should only be doing X, Y, or Z. You can't be doing anything else. And the intent of the person is to undermine you and handicap you to make you unable to perform any of these other jobs, when there is absolutely no reason you can't do these other things. There has been a great many wonderful women who have contributed in different ways to our people, our culture, our history. Some of those have had children. Some of those had children first and then did that, like Phyllis Schlafly, which will build a statue to the sky for her once we recapture our destiny. There have been many marvelous contributions. Some women are going to be incapable of having children. Some women are going to be incapable of keeping a man around. They are just witches, and they can serve other ways. So this idea that we're going to pigeonhole folks and that they got to stay focused on only one thing is idiotic, especially when the argument that is made when it comes to this virtue trapping, particularly when it comes to producing children. Every white woman in the white positive sphere, no matter what sphere it is inside the totality of the white positive sphere, could have 100 babies, and it wouldn't come anywhere close to offsetting the production of non-white babies streaming in from around the world. So it is the ideas, the ruminations of fools and also of anti-white saboteurs, and we should not tolerate such people. Now, we're not doing, as Jared's pointing out, this is not the conservative movement. We feel no need to white knight or to bow down to women. All women are not good. women are not born with angels' wings, and that's how conservatives, that's how the patriots, that's how they act and they behave. And if a woman says something or a tear streams down her face, a bunch of men will jump on the guy that's nearest to her and beat him to a bloody pulp. That won't happen here, because we know the reality that there are women who are angels and there are women who are demons. Just like there are men who are angels and there are men who are demons. We've seen, and we're just going to bring this reality with us, because that is what Kipping, Keep It Promethean, and we talked about that last week.
Oh, I like that. Kipping.
Yeah. This is about reason, logic, and evidence in all things. That's where it begins. In decision making and interpretation. And one of the things that we interpret when we look out at the world is that women are absolutely capable of just as much savagery, just as much brutality, just as much evil as any man. And we undermine our women, we undermine our families, we undermine our men, we undermine our children when we try to attribute this angelic status to them simply because they have a certain genitalia and are apt to cry if they get upset. I mean, this is stupid. So there are good women and there are bad women. We're going to acknowledge them for what they are. We're not going to be the conservatives, and we are absolutely not going to allow any virtue trapping. So anybody in the white positive sphere, certainly serving white well-being, who attempts to virtue trap our women, we're going to call them out, because that is a form of road blocking. That is a form of preventing us from reaching our people with this curative contagion. Because let me tell you this, ladies and gentlemen, Sarah might not have children now. Maybe she'll never have children. Maybe she'll have 10 children. But right now, she's able to make videos. Right now, others out there are able to make videos. And a woman is going to be inclined to listen to another woman more so than some guy like me up here who sometimes gets quite angry in front of the microphone and the camera. They're going to be apt to listen, and they're going to give heed to what she is saying. So if one of our women can reach 1,000, 10,000, 110, a million, whatever it is of our women, those are victories. Each and every one of them are victories. So no road blocking, and therefore no virtue trapping. I pass it back. Sarah, you probably have something to say to that, and then we'll get back to Jared with his great line of questioning.
Well, one thing I would say is, if there's any evidence of that, it would be that I feel a lot of confidence listening to someone like Laura Towler, who obviously a young woman who has, so far as I can tell, has done so much already, far more than a lot of the men who would complain that women shouldn't be making videos. And so I can only really give my own experience, and that I feel a lot of confidence watching and listening to her. Probably would not be half so outspoken if I didn't have that sort of initial little kick from another woman. So yeah, I suppose we're all just trying the best we can, aren't we? I do understand why a lot of men are angry at women. And so, I mean, maybe they just need to hear that, and to hear a woman to say, well, I recognize that, and we have been treated poorly. Hopefully we can start to. Another thing I would say is, though, don't worry, never underestimate how much a woman loves the white knight. I wouldn't worry about that, boys. Women don't mind that at all.
No.
Yeah, but you make some very good points, Jason, of course.
I missed that. Don't underestimate. What about a white knight?
How much a woman likes a white knight. It's not an insult.
We'll see.
Okay.
Sometimes what they say and what they respond to are different.
Oh, that's women, unfortunately.
We do appreciate your support. And it does mean a lot, what you said earlier about sometimes men just do need to hear that sympathetic voice from a woman, like what you were saying. You guys have been through a lot. And to have that support sometimes means the world. We certainly do appreciate it.
That's good.
So we have this is a nice segue into something else that we wanted to talk about, your birth rate deception video. That was one of the first things I watched from you. And I know it's something that's popular and should be. And it speaks to the fact that we're often told, we get these memes about, oh, the West is over, this country's over, England's finished, this is finished. We don't have the will to have more children. And you cited a study done in Britain about how the women do want to have children, but there's an entire environment that's been created that is disincentivizing them to do so, where they don't get the support. And we know that the support is going to other groups, right? We can leave it at that. So this is something very important, and I want to take some time to get into this. So we can begin wherever you want. Maybe you can give a brief outline of what you discussed in the video and what you found, and then maybe we can get into the implications.
Yeah, well, the video was just something I came across quite by chance. It was a study that had shown it was taken about 3 or 4 years back, I believe, and it was more or less saying that the vast majority of women in Britain do want children, and in fact, it was a study for all European countries, and all of them overwhelmingly cited between, I think it was 3 and 4 children on average they would like. And this was, I believe, women from the age of 18 up to 35. And now, when you work out the maths of that, if that were to be if that desire were to be realized, that would mean the difference between a birth rate continuity very, very easily. And that was a surprise to me because I was under the impression that there was something in the psyche of the culture that was making women detest and dislike and loathe the idea of childbirth, and simultaneously men, and that they'd entered this sort of slump, which incidentally I've been looking at anyway, and that's actually quite common throughout history. There've been various points of British history where it's just dipped slightly and it just needs a little bit of, helping hand to prop it up again. But for some reason, this has been taken as a symptom of kind of existential abolition and decline. And I'm very cynical of that. I think that could itself be a bit of propaganda, which is very demoralizing. So when I saw this, I thought, well, I mean, it's not a major study, but I thought it was significant, and I wondered what other people thought of it, because again, that makes the difference of replacement migration and just being able to continue. We certainly have the resources which are being, as you've just said, Jared, bypassed to other groups in housing and child benefit. So it's a question of why it's being suppressed for the native women and being redirected elsewhere. That to me would say it's an intentional, self-conscious decision to actually kind of suppress us. And actually, that's quite a human rights issue as well. It's quite a criminal act, from what I understand. So I thought that was quite meaningful, though.
I thought it had been just a study you saw for Britain. You're saying you've seen, and this is going to be one of my questions, you've seen similar studies for all European countries?
The study I had, yes, I can post it below after the stream maybe, and for people to see. But it had, I know the study was the one I was doing a video on was on Britain, but I know the study taken was from all European countries and all more or less said the same. I think, with the exception of some Eastern European countries that were saying sort of 5 or 6 kids, which is very interesting. Yeah, so all European countries have said women generally wanted 3 or 4 children. And for those women who said they wanted none, the ones who did more than made up for the numbers. So just very simple maths. I was quite surprised and thought, oh, well, hang on a minute. I thought we had a birth rate problem. Well, we do, but it's not because it's not wanted. And I thought that was a meaningful difference. Very meaningful.
It is very meaningful. It is very much indeed. And I like your angle about the human rights. Compare it to, or contrast it with Hungary, right? Don't they have a program where you're getting a loan now when you get married, and with each child you have, there's a significant reduction in what you have to pay back on the principal, and I think by the time you have the 4th kid, correct me if I'm wrong in the chat or afterwards, but I think it's by the time you have the 4th kid, something like the equivalent of $30,000 is wiped out. So that's a country that is taking its resources and is doing something to incentivize. Imagine if we all lived in countries where there were programs like that, and you knew, not only that, you could turn on the media, you could take your children to the movies, or you could sit down in the evening when the family's unwinding and watch a television program and see things that were positive about your people and weren't brainwashing. You trust that they could go to school, and the same would be happening, that they wouldn't be getting brainwashing. You know, we're people who plans ahead. We think about the future. Whether they know it or not, even people who aren't as conscious of this as we are sitting here, many of us are sensing that this is just not a safe environment in which to breed. And that is essentially what your video is getting at. It's an extraordinary video. I find it very powerful, and I do recommend people watch it. I'm sure our moderators will put the link in the chat.
Oh, well, I mean, just another caveat to that, because I have been reading a bit more on this since, and I'm going to make another video on it soon. But another point of interest you might find interesting is that I was reading a bit about how actually having a multi-ethnic culture can actually interfere itself with the tendency to give birth. And of course, this relates to what's the book? Is it Bowling Alone? I've forgotten his name.
Yeah.
he writes about how you need a high trust society. So I started looking into how significant having these high trust societies are for childbirth. I'm lucky, my mum's a nurse. She works with obstetrics gynecology, so I managed to get into all her library books and have a little look at this. And there's a very high correlation between maximizing your kind of maternal instinct and actually the culture you're living in. If it's monoethnic, that's a whole nother phenomenon, which I haven't managed to make a video on it yet, but I think I will, because there is something about the actual culture itself which is putting people in a very state of a constantly releasing stress hormones if they're around groups that are kind of subconsciously considered a threat.
Yes.
It's very interesting.
There's a countercurrents. There's an article on countercurrents that was published within the last month with the funny title, "Give Your Amygdala a Break," or "Give Your Amygdala a Rest." And the amygdala is the part of the brain that senses fear and outside threats. And the writer talks about, I think he's American, and he talks about how he has been frequenting Eastern Europe and going there for long stretches of time. And even though he might not speak the language and come from that exact culture, the comfort that he feels there and the lack of, he gets into interesting things about just going to the gym and sharing showers and toilets with people like him, versus not back in the States. And a little bit about the biology of that. It's very, very interesting.
That's
very
fascinating. I will read that. What's it called? Sorry, give your amygdala. I'll write that down.
I think it's called "Give Your Amygdala a Rest."
I will definitely look at that. Yeah, it's amazing that all these subconscious things you would never know were going on just in terms of your biology and the threat that you've constantly is being levied against your psyche without you realizing it is amazing. Give your amygdala a rest.
Yeah. You don't know those stresses sometimes that are there present with you all the time until they've been lifted, and that is what he relates in this experience. Now, the studies that you found and what you discussed in that video also, of course, people can connect the dots, and we don't have to be super explicit. But the other layer, the deeper level of it, is what you call death rattle propaganda. So if people want to have children, but they don't have the resources, then the natural question is, well, why are the resources being diverted away from them? While at the same time, in a pincer move, we're being told, as I mentioned a few moments ago, oh, the West is just naturally in this cycle of decline. It's over. The West is over. This particular country is over. And we're being sold, the fall of Rome. You see these things invoked, whether in memes or in longer form. So
yeah, I'm very cynical about that. And sometimes it does come from the right wing, and I've been guilty of it myself. And I do understand why people worry about that, because they see things falling around them. But I think, unfortunately, if you get it into your head that this is an irreversible decline, then that's it. There will be no optimism, or I guess it's that old adage of where there's life, there's hope. And I'm very keen to sort of trace the steps of what's happened and sort of try to show, well, no, this isn't natural what is occurring. This is sort of it's a campaign against us, which is very deliberate, and you can see this very clearly. The mass movement of people into Europe has been designed. They're being trafficked in by the busload. It's not natural. So I think we have to be very careful not to see this as just a sort of, I mean, I know that I hate to evoke the language of, you're probably sick of hearing it in America. What do they used to call it? Something destiny. Manifest destiny. Yeah, I know. I'm sure that makes your eyes roll. But there's a kind of a new age manifest destiny in Europe, which is this idea of, well, this is just all part and parcel of being a global citizenry, and it was always going to happen. And it's, nature is constantly in flux, and this is just the new world, the new order. I don't buy that for a second. It sort of negates the choices we still have left, and also the choices that have been made to bring this about, which have been self-conscious choices and unwanted ones. So somebody has to be held to task, for those choices. So I try not to get involved with that, because otherwise, well, I think we have this tendency of eulogizing ourselves before we're already dead. And I do look at sometimes history and I think, God, we've been in much worse situations. We've had 2 world wars. I don't want another world war, of course, but I think we have it in us to manage. It's going to be difficult, but I try not to write us off yet. I guess it's the difference between how much you want it and how much you don't. So I'm very cynical about that. Yeah. We still have, we're not dying yet, I don't think.
You also relate this to humiliation, that people are being, again, taught in the public square to repeat certain things in their lives, and they have to look over their shoulder to worry about, is anyone hearing them if they question the orthodoxy? That a lot of people know in their heart of hearts privately that all of this is nonsense, but there's this element of humiliation you talk about. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, well, that was just something I'd come across reading about what was life was like in Prague when it was under Soviet control, and a big part of that I was finding time and again in various books was humiliation. So, for instance, it would be like when in the Ukraine they used to say that it was the agricultural breadbasket of Europe, but of course they were starving. Right now, the one is sort of, diversity is our strength, when of course everything's burning around us. And there is I think humiliation is a big part of that. I don't know what it's like for men, but I've heard other men talk about how they feel it can be emasculating, not their fault, but to see other foreign men come in, particularly with these grooming gangs. And I think that is a deliberate strategy, actually, of these gangs to humiliate, but also to humiliate the women, because we're meant to be the mother protectors. And it's a real violation of identity. I mean, even something a couple of days ago, I saw David Copperfield, the new Dickens play on TV, is going to be played by this Indian gentleman. Now, I'm sure he's very nice. I'm sure he's a good actor. But all of this is sort of part of, for me, of a sort of violation of identity. And it's so small and inchoate that you can't quite put your finger on why it's humiliating. But nonetheless, it is. And there's nothing sort of overtly or outwardly cruel about it. But I suppose it's just that slight assault on your identity that it's difficult to explain why it's humiliating. But you have this kind of conditioning of guilt and shame it turns you, I think, into a people of walking. I think the author I cited said it was like becoming a marionette or a kind of puppet, led to your death. So it's an interesting one. I don't know what you think about it.
I think you're being a little polite. I think it's overt, and that any other people would scream bloody murder if they saw their stories being told with people that aren't their own, and they should be.
We have some questions and some super chats we're gonna have to jump in and read now.
Okay.
The first one from Beer Hall Push over here on the question widget, and then after that we have a question from the one and only Millennial Woes. Beer Hall Pooch first. Who is Sarah's most complex recalcitrant writer of English language?
Oh, probably Alexander Pope. Probably Pope's Essay on Man. I would really recommend that. It's beautiful, very complex, very demanding, very. It's written in blank verse, so probably Paradise Lost, actually, by Milton. Yeah, that's a really good. It's a really good story as well. Especially if you look at it with the drawings. I forget the name of is it Dora who does the drawings? But yeah, probably one of those two.
Magnificent. And we have Millennial Woes asking here, and thank you for being here, Woes. Does Sarah ever get sarcastic, jealous remarks from other girls about her posh accent?
No, I don't think I have. I think everyone's been very friendly. I was very self-conscious of it because, as you know, in Britain we have we're very self-conscious about class, and probably does come across as a bit lofty or what we call sort of toffee over here. So I was a bit worried about that. But no, I've never had any sarcasm, more just sort of unbridled hatred. But no.
Well, tell us about the unbridled hatred then.
Oh, I think it's probably just seen as a sort of tenet of, how can I put it, being part of a gentry, which of course I'm not. It's a very old age British class interest. We used to have what they called the upstairs downstairs culture, which sort of leveled out after the war, and I guess this would be seen as this sort of accent would be seen as a kind of remnant of wealth, maybe. But and of course, because I think sometimes nationalism is very much a working class, or seen as a working class movement. I think I said this to you, Jason, before, that I was always a bit self-conscious that maybe I wouldn't be seen as working class enough, and therefore because and understandably, because maybe the middle classes have been very much responsible for this enriching or diversifying, because we tend not to live in quote unquote diverse areas. So there's a little bit of animosity there, which I actually understand and sympathize with. But no, I must admit, I've never had any girls I can think of who have been horrible, or very friendly, more or less.
I think it's very important to have all types from all strata of life. And I know we're getting to some super chats, but I can't help take this little off ramp into this tangential question for a moment. You said that there's been a leveling of that class structure. Maybe there's always going to be a little bit of suspicion, among different classes, one to the other. But ultimately, do you think that this is a good thing, that class structure has been muted? Do you think that maybe it served a purpose, and that there's people
That's
have
a very good question.
place? And
yeah, I mean, I do think having a hierarchy is always very important. But I must admit, I mean, when we're talking, I guess if we're talking sort of late 18th century, I think if, as I say, if you were either upstairs or downstairs as the servant, that would have been a miserable life. I think it's probably good that it's equalized out in some way. It's a shame that it took a world war for that to happen. But I also think the British are also quite like their aristocracy in a peculiar way. We have the politician Jacob Rees-Mogg in the UK, and he had these sort of fan pages suddenly popping up because he would wear a top hat around. And I think for the English, they see that as a kind of mark of eccentricity, which we sort of romanticize. I think we quite like, because it's vestiges of an old era of top hats and fox hunting. And these are all part of, I guess, a home that people don't think can ever be dispossessed because it's all part of a memory that can't be touched. That's one of the nice things about memory, I suppose. It's a difficult one, though. I mean, it's. I think the remnants of it will always be there so long as there's an English. It's probably better that there's a little bit more what they call social mobility now, though. Unless you were on the upstairs, I'm sure that was a very lovely line. Yeah.
Well, I'll say the problem when we talk about things like, and this is something that will have to be deferred until we recapture our destiny, but when we talk about social mobility, I think we're saying one thing that objectively is virtuous, and then in application, it is how is the term go in business? Maybe it'll come back to me, but in application, it becomes something very different, because in application, we want people who are talented, industrious, etc., to be able to rise, but the means by which the stairway by which they rise is through the merchant class. I mean, we really don't see another way for people to elevate themselves in any meaningful, substantial way other than by becoming wealthier. They're not given the folks who are just extremely bright or extremely learned or extremely. I mean, we can think about other ideologies that have been implemented. You think about this, it was mentioned by this anti-white dirtbag that was also caught on video by Project Veritas, and he was talking about look at the Soviet Union. They produced, it was, this guy's saying it was so amazing, and he said they produced the Balishnikov, the AK-47, best firearm ever made. Well, it wasn't the Soviet Union that produced it. It was one brilliant white guy, and the gun does work dirty. It works old. It's easy to repair, etc. And what was his claim after that? The Soviets gave him a little award, and then he went off to this hole in the ground to live. This guy was not lauded for all time for his contribution to his people. So in the future, we have to develop systems that provide stairways for this mobility, other than just economic improvement, other than just, well, they've gotten wealthier, and so therefore they are now somehow superior. It's absurd. And boy, in America, well, of course, all around the world, we see that that's ridiculous. We have NFL defensive backs who have retarded level IQs, and yet they're multimillionaires. We have rappers with retarded level IQs, and of course, all of this may or may not be true. They're probably all brilliant as possible, but just ask YouTube. But they end up making millions and millions and millions of dollars and live in palaces. And people think, well, these, they have now proven themselves. They haven't proven squat. We need to elevate that which deserves to be elevated. So that's a system to be determined at a later day. And I have no doubt that we, Western kind, will be able to find the answers to those questions as we continue to find the answers to all questions. Let's see, we have here, speaking of your accent, somebody wrote in the chat, I just noticed, CY wrote, daughter of Albion is just well-spoken, not posh. So thank you for that. Machiavelli Sucks writes, good accent. So people were chiming in on the
thanks, folks.
iron will, classically educated lady, and etc. So a bunch of these come. Thank you all. We have a super chat over on Ko-fi from Vicky. Thank you very much, dear lady. Super chatting $12 and writing, I have only recently found your channel and find your streams optimistic, uplifting, and hopeful. Thank you both so very much for your hard work. Well, thank you so much, Vicky.
Thank you, Vicky.
Yes, it's wonderful to have you with us. Everyone who is a newcomer, you are welcome to speak. You're welcome to be a wallflower, and we embrace you with both arms. Over here on Entropy, the great Roy Danton, a hero of heroes in our community, super chatting $10 here. Going back to the earlier question with this super chat, since you talked about tea before, which is your favorite? English breakfast, Earl Grey, green tea? So which of those?
Oh, not green. No, I can never get green. I depends what mood I'm in. I think a weekend is more of a English breakfast maybe, but I do like Earl Grey otherwise. Yeah. Never
Very
green
good.
though.
Ohesian Outlaw just came in with a super chat of $5. Hello, dear friend. Over here on Entropy, where can I get my Millennial Woes robe?
Yeah, I want to know this too.
he should start. Woes, if you're still listening, you really need to put that up on your Merc account so that people can get their own Woes robe.
I would love that.
The Thin Red Line, hello to you, good friend. Super chatting $10 over here on Entropy. And writing, too bad I missed half of Daughter of Albion. That is a shame. Well, the video will stay up, of course, on the No White Guilt channel. You'll be able to watch the rest at your leisure. Of course, it will also be available at your leisure, I guess, on Twitter via Periscope, Facebook, VK, all of these other places that we are. And Ohesian Outlaw, again, this time saying everything he wanted to say with a super chat of $10. Thank you, dear friend, for that. And we have some super chats on YouTube. Hansa, great to see you, and thank you very much for the super chat of $5 and writing, salute to Albion. Which does she deem preeminent, Shakespeare or Chaucer? Also, can she see English awakening to a love and loyalty? Can you see the English awakening to a love and loyalty of their own? So first the Shakespeare, Chaucer, and then do you see the English people awakening, maybe going free very soon?
Oh, that's a very good question. It depends what you mean, I suppose, by preeminent. If you mean as a talent, see, Shakespeare is very, very watchable as theatre, and I think that Chaucer he's slightly more coarse on the ear, especially because it's Middle English. I think that sometimes can be a bit too distant for people, and it is sort of hyper religious, although it's very bawdy and satirical. I'd say probably Shakespeare is preeminent. He's just so beautiful. They're very beautiful in their own way, but I'd say, yeah, undoubtedly Shakespeare. But I don't know. What you tell me what you think. You have to tell me in the chat if you think that you agree.
It's an easy one for me, Shakespeare. Jared?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have memories in high school of we actually had to read Chaucer out loud in some classes to understand the lilt of the Middle English and how it was connected to older Germanic forms. And I remember our teacher saying, almost read it like you're imitating Swedish or something with that lilt. And it gave me a sense of that longer connection to the older forms of our language. And again, the branches coming back to the trunk, as we were discussing.
Oh, I like that. That's very poetic.
Before.
Which one was it, Jared? Was it which poem was it you had to read?
It was probably an introduction to Canterbury Tales, if I'm remembering correctly. Some of the beginning of that.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. But I don't know if I'm in a position. I'm not as studied in it as you are. I don't know if I'm in a position to say which is preeminent
Oh, of course you are. Just have to enjoy it, I think, don't
and
you?
which would represent England and the English people. But I think it's wonderful that both are in the English trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're both up there for sure.
We have Dale Jones super chatting and saying everything he wants to say with a $2 super chat. Thank you very much, dear friend. Roy Danton over here on YouTube as well at $1.99. Thank you, dear friend, and writing such an amazing discussion! Exclamation point. Thank you, brother. And I think that is all of the super chats. I have a frivolous question from Ralph asking if Sarah knows anything about the LBW laws in cricket.
Oh, do you know what? I like cricket. I do like cricket, but I don't know anything about those laws. I'm sorry. I'm more of a kind of sit on the lawn with Pims and strawberries type girl and watch the cricket than I am. So I'd have to leave the laws to someone else, I'm afraid.
Sounds like a lovely afternoon.
It does sound nice, doesn't it? If we have the weather.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and we know that the weather's not always wonderful over there.
Not always. 90% of the time, Jason.
So, shall we? We'll do the remaining questions and then see if any more audience questions comes in. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So this will still continue on some of the things we were speaking about before we took that break for super chats, and that is the regime and the whole anti-white messaging. On the one hand, pushes that everything is inessential in human nature, right? Everything now is fluid, but that at the same time, there's an apparent contradiction that things that they want to make everyone the same. So does that also fall into this category of trying to keep people confused? How do you parse that out?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing we often have here now, in fact, I often think of America because I know you have this legacy of being, or recent legacy of being called the melting pot. Now, this is something that has started to transition over to Britain. We're now also referred to as a nation of immigrants. But this is very peculiar, of course, because you can't, on the one hand, be a nation of immigrants, but simultaneously be a nation that is, as we are told, intrinsically xenophobic, because you can't otherize that which is already a part of you. Yes, it's a terrible confusion. I don't know whether that's deliberate or it's just part of the inherent latent stupidity of of this kind of creeping Marxism. I don't know. I suspect it's probably intentional in many ways. How another good example is just off the top of my head, there was recently I was listening to the radio, this quote unquote comedian was talking about how the British shouldn't be proud of their role in the world because they've always left this sort of trail of destruction and trauma. But when he then went on to sort of talk about, he sort of almost immediately changed his track to say, you know, my ancestors were, of course, abused by the British. And I thought it was interesting that he sort of forgot momentarily that on the one hand, he's claiming to be more British than fish and chips. On the other hand, he knew the language between my ancestors and your ancestors. And I tend to find that it's oftentimes when these people forget or they're caught out in this sort of moment of surprise. I think someone in the audience was heckling at him, and this made him sort of suddenly remember that he identified as Asian ultimately. And I always find that amazing, really. They know exactly who the British are when they talk about the empire, because they don't consider themselves as a part of that legacy. They consider themselves as an oppressed part of that legacy. So yeah, it's very difficult and confusing, isn't it? Sorry?
They want to have their cake and eat it too.
Well, exactly. And who can blame them? I mean, but yes, it's very true. It's very confusing. You must find that more confusing in America, though, because you have people coming at you from all angles.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's only confusing if we incorrectly observe their pretexts for what they are and take their pretexts for the face value. If we know what they're actually after, then it makes perfect sense. You know, for somebody, anti-whites are able to argue contradictory points with absolute verve and wild animation, as long as both arrive at anti-white conclusions. When you see that, it makes perfect sense. When you go down these trails of trying to discuss how can you be this and this, that doesn't make any sense. They can make any kind of argument under the sun. They can say, well, your people can both hate outsiders and yet be a country of nothing but outsiders because they have a psychological issue that causes them to behave this way. So they can just go on and on and on, just like the anti-white that was having a debate with Unwashed yesterday. It just rolled on from one anti-white argument to the next, just so they could always arrive at an anti-white conclusion. And that's why I suggest to all of you who engage or go out there trying to help others go free. That's why I suggest if you come across somebody like that, unless you have an audience that you're going to help, vagues of our people who haven't started to go free yet, and you can use the opportunity to use that anti-white as a foil to help these people to see exactly what that anti-white is after, then engage. Otherwise, just say thank you for letting me know that you're a piece of human filth, and I will move on with my day. And I'll talk to somebody who has some value that I can help to go free, because surely this guy isn't. But what a wonderful day it will be when we recapture our destiny and we're able to take such individuals and invite them to go live in places like the Congo and be around, the kind of people that they want to be around, where they won't have to worry about things like all these anti-white slurs that we're supposedly just endlessly imbued with upon inception, I guess. But Jared, I think you had something you wanted to say.
I say we give, on that, yes, I agree. I say we give the people what they want. I've spoken about this several times now. Give them the one-way ticket to certain neighborhoods.
Yeah, I'm happy to crowdfund for that, for sure.
Yeah. Put your money where your mouth is, Tor. Well, a couple more things. I want to end on a high note, so I'll do this as the second to last question. And this is not something that we'd prepared, but it's been in the news, and of course you're over there, so I know the chat might be interested in this as well. We were talking briefly a little bit ago about classes and hierarchy, and I guess that had whiffs of aristocracy as a topic. Any thoughts on what's going on with Harry and Meghan right now, and what's the mood over there, and what are the talking points? What are people debating over? And do you think the media talking points are a distraction from something that's more essential? Is there a story that's not being told?
Well, I was thinking about this yesterday. I was getting ready to go out and I was watching something on YouTube, and you know how one video just goes on to a next. So this interview came up with a photographer who was the official royal photographer. It's not the kind of thing I'd ever have watched. I would have clicked off it if I was near my laptop. But I let it run, and he was saying, well, he was sort of talking about how disappointed he was that not so much Meghan with respect to her, but that Harry was leaving, because I think, in honest, I'm not terribly interested in the royal family. I don't think most people are, but there is a sort of conflict there, because you can't necessarily be a nationalist and be interested in British history without recognizing the central role of the monarchy. And the Queen, of course, ultimately is the head of the church. So I think people feel very disappointed that the royal family have been very absent in what is happening on the continent. This rapid Islamization of the continent ultimately is the Queen's duty to be intervening with. But of course, she's sort of very isolated from the public eye. I think people feel very resentful of that. And I do think this sort of Meghan and Harry news, although a lot of it's sort of gossip column news, it's in sort of glossy tabloid magazines, it did make me think how actually it is a bit of a loss, in the sense that it's just another gesture in a long line of gestures that are more or less telling the public that they are no longer of interest, really, as a country. We have a prince who doesn't really have much interest in being part of the country anymore. I think that gesture does mean something to people, even if they don't allow themselves to admit that. Harry himself, from what I remember growing up, was always very well liked by the public. He did a lot for Help for Heroes, which was a military charity. He did all sorts of these marathons, and I think he went either the Arctic or Antarctic, I'm not sure, with wounded soldiers on these various treks, and it was all televised, and he was well liked. He seemed like a nice young man. And I think it's just probably, I am a bit sad he's going, because it's just another gesture of, well, there's not really much left of interest in Britain anymore. It's not necessarily, it's a place that all the world's refuse are arriving, but all the kind of aristocracy want to be away from. And I think that Saudi doesn't feel any sort of duty to the country. So it's a difficult one because, again, the royal family is one of those phenomena that I think most nationalists put to the side. They don't want to think about it because it's an embarrassment. In the news recently, we've been hearing that Prince Andrew was very closely related to Epstein and all these sort of nefarious paedophile rings. And it's very disappointing because we used to have such a great deal of pride in our kings and queens, particularly, I've got a big portrait of Queen Victoria on the wall in front of me here. I was always a big fan of hers, and to think that we've gone from having her as the Empress of India just into this kind of glossy tabloid phenomenon is so depressing. So I'm sure there's something symbolic to that. I do think it's meaningful as a gesture, but I guess you'd really have to dig deep into what that might represent. I don't know. Is it in the press much over there? I'm not sure.
Yes, it's on the covers of magazines when you go to.
Is it? And is that because is a suggestion that it's because she's leaving because it's a racist country? Is that? I mean, that's what we're hearing, and it's very insulting, of course, to us to be told that.
That, I think, from what I'm getting back from over there, that's the line. That's the kind of woke mainstream line. I mean, the timing's interesting with Andrew too. It's probably to distract from that.
Yes, I imagine.
There's deeper things going on. I was listening to some of Ed Dutton's stream before we got on. He was live streaming earlier, and with the guy he does it with, I think is Michael, and they had some interesting perspectives on it. And they even had some data about how societies don't have as many economic boom bust cycles when it is a monarchy versus a democracy, and they're definitely not less wealthy. And it does, in terms of a kind of a folkish and traditionalist and people-oriented milieu it creates, just that feeling around everyone. It's a little easier for people to conceptualize them as an extended family when they're all a people and the royal family is kind of the head, kind of the parents, if you will, of the entire nation. So they were actually making some kind of a scientific argument because, even though Ed Dutton studied religion, he's now buoyed it up with all kinds of scientific research. And then he has this guy, Michael, with him that I don't know what his credentials are, but apparently he studied genetics and biology. So they even, just as a kind of a biological social imperative kind of angle, they were making arguments for monarchy. And it's strange, I'm sure, for the Americans in our audience, it might sound very strange to American ears, but I'm open to hear that kind of thing because for me, and maybe I'm not a typical American in this way, but we were talking about Germany before, right? We're talking about the castles and the romance and all of that. And I've been to Germany, as I said, I've been to England as well. And even more so than the flags of nation states, and even in some cases for me, and I know I'm just speaking for myself, even more so than pictures, paintings of the founding fathers writing the constitutions, what gets my imagination going and my blood moving is any kind of image of this like a traditional order. When you see like coats of arms and something like that that's been passed down, that gets me going more than the flag of a nation state or more than a legal document being written. That's something that's passed down generation to generation, a coat of arms and titles and castles and all that. And maybe you could chalk it up to romance. This is
I love it.
It's a big topic, and maybe it's a personal thing of mine, and maybe we can revisit it on another stream. I'm not saying we have time to delve into all of that now, but it's interesting because, again, this is where it does dovetail with what Jason and I speak about here, and I know something that we at least all share, even though we may have different perspectives, and that is nothing's really off the table to me, because the main question is, what is good for our people? What is going to help us survive? And if we determine that some kind of structure like that, at least in some part, it might be mixed with elements of republicanism, but if that works, or at least for some of our people and some of our nations, then fine. I want our people to survive and thrive and be healthy, live out beautiful lives. And so we're in this great era right now of kind of reassessing everything. So I'm open to reassess all of these things, even this structure we have here in the United States.
Well, you have so many great points there about the structure of, well, what you say about coat of arms, I think there's a real majesty in and dignity. I think maybe the word is stateliness. It's, I guess, what Elgar called pomp and circumstance. But because, of course, the king traditionally was the power and dominion through God. Of course, we have secular law now. It's funny, somebody recently said, oh no, I was talking to somebody recently and I said United Kingdom, and they sort of flinched at the idea of saying a kingdom. It sort of reminded me that we used to use this term, just like we used to say Christendom. And there's a real stateliness to that. I love a good coat of arms as well, because obviously they're very flagrant displays of ancestry and lineage, and ones that cannot ultimately be dispossessed. They're sort of epitaphs again of memory. And I think also just the fact, England is very unique in that we have English common law. And when you think about something like, when people talk about what's unique to England, one of the first things you often think of, or at least I do anyway, is Magna Carta. So the medieval writ that once said that, well, the king, at least ostensibly, ought to be the servant of the people, not the other way around. That's after we had several mad kings that just sort of lost it. And now, of course, Parliament is meant to hold dear to that, which is why the European Union was such an insult to the British people. We're not used to that kind of top-down sovereign authority. We're used to sovereignty bottom up, and but Magna Carta is so intrinsically bound to monarchy and crown. And I think also, even when we had our empire, that was all done under the guise of a gift to the Queen. Queen Victoria used to come out and see all the people on the streets, and there aren't many photographs of her, but the ones that we do see, she's meeting, I don't know, there was something, a great deal of sort of pride, I think, in monarchy as being an extension of, well, I suppose it's the idea of dominion through God and the empire. That's ultimately what the empire was. It was seen as a quote unquote civilizing mission. Not really allowed to say that now. But at least it gave an energy to a people. The Victorian era was such a boom of industry because they always had in mind this consciousness of a future. And when I think you don't have a shared sense of future, which you often don't get in a multicultural, multi-ethnic society, because everybody's tugging at odds with each other and has a different vision. I always liked having a king or a queen to be at the head of that, at the forefront of this vision of the future. And that's why you see the Queen's name on all of our naval ships. And I guess even if there's a kind of falsehood or it's a myth, the King/Queen makes a major part of the British mythology. And we're not, of course, the only nation to have a monarch. I know Germany used to, at least, not anymore. But does Sweden have a queen, I believe?
Yeah, they do. And it creates a rallying point. I do believe that we need something big and dramatic, a vision. And even though some of the civilizing mission, as we now see, and we're still in the throes of learning this, had some blowback, and maybe it was a little too utopian, and that's the tendency of our people too. Yes, that sense of something grandiose, and that there's this arrow through history that you're moving towards, and that there's a hierarchy from the people tilling the earth up through the monarchy, and the monarchy is tied to something even higher, something metaphysical. This is what I meant, and hopefully there aren't too many Americans in the audience who are misunderstanding me, but we're here for a discussion and to pick through these ideas. That's what I meant. That, to me, is instinctively more inspiring than just electing another president who wears the suit of the mercantile class. This came up, I don't know if it was with Semi-Agog, Jason, but this came up too about what would your leaders even wear? We live in a day and age where all of the prime ministers, presidents, etc., they wear the garb of the mercantile class. It is a business suit. Now, I like a good suit, but there's something about that that's still on that level of like the majesty of your leadership. It just doesn't get my imagination going. It doesn't get my senses of loyalty going. It feels very cold to me. I don't know if some kind of traditional military garb, not functional military like the Middle East leaders, like actually dressing like a general, that I don't think that would be our thing, but some kind of ceremonial, some kind of mixture between the suit and something more ceremonial. We'd be living. But think about that for a president or prime minister or whatever the leader is to be decked out. that symbology, the symbology around that would have to grow out of our whole society would be different. That one little detail would be reflective of a whole value system and way a society is organized and the values that people have. It's completely different than the world that we're living in today. And that's why that's the project we have in front of us, and that's why we're heretics, the people who question this we do.
Well, I mean, just thinking about this, as you say, this idea of majesty. One of my favorite lines from Wordsworth's poem, which he wrote right in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. He was stood in the middle of London on Westminster Bridge, looking up at St Paul's Cathedral, which was being repaired. And he just his line, the first line is, "Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive," and that I always think of that as being, and that's kind of the sentiment of a nation that's alive and expectant. It has a sense of its own future and it's exciting. I've always really loved that, and I think that that's something hopefully we can keep sustaining. But that's one thing that always keeps me optimistic is that line. And also, I mean, as for what was it you were just saying as well about not ceremonial garb, Jason? Was it? Did you say? Quite like that.
The older.
Jared.
The more of a leaders being like what they would wear when you imagine this, the kind of world that we would want, something ceremonial but with hints of military, something to suggest you're part of this traditional order of the office and whatever it is, and not again just I'm an elected official and I'm just some psychopath. I'm just some psychopath who said whatever I needed to say to get your votes.
Well, it's also I suppose a big part of it is also the imagination. I was listening to one of Morgoth's streams recently, and he was just talking about War and Peace and how he was really interested in all the talk about all of these old balls that they would have in these gorgeous Russian ballrooms and dances, and even for people who never lived that life, like none of us have. So it's just a beautiful kind of imagined world of decadence, and it's also quite harmless, I think. I don't know if you follow any of these sort of pages on Instagram, like the Romanovs, but I follow it just to look at all the jewelry and tiaras, and you hear about how many hours went into just making a single piece of jewelry, and it was all done with so much love and a kind of sense of producing it for, I suppose, a gift to the Queen, because she was the head of the state or the king. I quite like that. I think that it's. I think we really miss something with these little gestures of grandeur and majesty. I know it's a lot of money. Some people see it as very material, but I like it. I think I like all these kind of old traits of an old world, and
right. As long as it's not at the expense of.
No,
people are taken care of first, and
we're not going to. No, not French Revolution style for sure.
Yeah,
no.
the aristocracy doing its duty. Well, I just remembered something from the Dutton stream, and it's that even at the time of you mentioned the French, even at the time of the most materialistic kings, I think it was one of the Louis.
Louis, that's right, the 10th, I think.
I think it was the 14th. Only absorbed something like 5% of France's GDP for the actual functioning. And I'm sure a lot of it was the pomp and circumstance of the courtly life, whereas many more times that's like 35%, they were saying goes into all the bureaucracies, is eaten up in all of the, you'll have to forgive me, I don't know the exact details, but they were saying in democracies that a much bigger chunk of the GDP is actually eaten up in modern democracies by all of the bureaucracy and all the statecraft of the modern democracy, and to say it was 5% in the time of I think it was Louis XIV that spearheaded people justifying the French Revolution. It just gives you some perspective about where we are now. Certainly, I don't think anyone here wants the kind of society where people are slaving away to make jewelry for a few people. If there's folk out there who are not living well, who don't have clean water or something, we don't want that kind of society, of course. The whole idea is that, as you said, the leadership serves the people, but to express love for the people in the particular form of the avatar of a royal family or an aristocracy, I think that is more what you were getting at with.
Well, like expressions or tokens of affection and devotion, especially through craft. I mean, these unique craftsmanships that are just the investment of time again would be tokens of not necessarily idolatry, but probably fidelity or devotion, I suppose.
Yeah,
that's quite meaningful.
It's kind of a celebration of the pageantry of
Yes, that's
life,
a good
and
word.
you're here now in this era, and one day you won't be here, but there will still be a king or queen of whatever your land is, and there will be all of us being part of this story. And that's again very different than most of these democratic socialist modern nation states. And one more quick thing, and then I'll turn it over, is what you said about the Magna Carta and a class of aristocracy actually serving the people. That is actually, again, going back to that theme of the trunk, that is an Indo-European trait going back thousands of years to war bands. And Ricardo Duchesne, somebody that I often mention on these
Yes,
streams,
he's
that I've learned a
wonderful.
lot from, he does speak about that if you're more interested. So it didn't come out of nowhere. And while you should certainly be proud of the Magna Carta being in your particularly English trajectory, it does still echo sentiments of our people, and the fact that unlike other peoples in other parts of the world, nothing's perfect. Not saying there weren't crazy rulers that took advantage of their position. Of course there were, but there was less of that instance of a top-down authority where there was no dimensionality to it and it was unilateral, versus, again, going back to our war bands and clientage of war leaders that became kings, and then sometimes the war leader and the king were actually two separate offices, of a mutual devotion of the war part of them. They took care of their warriors, and that eventually became a system of a king with aristocracy. And there were mutual, even in the feudal system, as opposed to the feudal system in Japan, there were mutual points of obligation that were understood. Again, it wasn't always perfect, but our instinct for that, it being a two-way street with the leadership, is, again, much more prevalent in our people from what we've studied. And as Jason says, for the YouTube censors, go off and study this on your own. But we're just saying that this is a perspective we've heard. You have to go do your own studying, that it's not unilateral in our case. It is more mutual.
Yeah, you summed it up really beautifully with that mutual devotion. I think that I couldn't have put it better. It's not an exploitative relationship. Well, at least, I mean, I'm sure it has historically been at points, but for better or for worse. And the other thing is that people will hold the monarchy accountable. That's one thing that the English know how to do well, and certainly the French. I mean, you can't necessarily get away with being an exploitative king or queen. So
yeah, I think some of our memory of monarchy probably comes more from recent eras and the Industrial Revolution. And there were certainly a lot of people who suffered and had terrible lives and were exploited because of the mercantile class expanding, getting too much power, and then it all being about, well, we have to make the most stuff the quickest. And there are people that had terrible lives during those times. People have terrible lives now, of course, but there were a lot of people exploited when the industrial boom came, and they had to have people go work in factories and coal mines and whatnot. So,
it was miserable and dirty.
Without question. Well, this has been an absolutely scintillating conversation with Sarah, daughter of Albion, and we'll have to have her back in the future without question. We have some super chats, and I think some at least one question we have over here, or it's a request by Tall Kevin. Great to see you, brother, over on the question widget. Says, stop the conspiracy. Shakespeare was a Middle Eastern immigrant.
Well, I heard, yes, a dark-skinned woman of color. Yes, which is a title I read, which really made me laugh because, of course, a woman of color is dark-skinned.
Hermaphrodite as well.
I wouldn't put it past the BBC or Channel 4 to put up something.
I've seen it somewhere. I'll have to find it because it really made me laugh.
Man, I thought you were joking at first. Wow.
No. For classic tautology.
How dreadful. Well, we have here Roy Danton back again on Entropy, super chatting $5. Thank you, dear friend. I had to read Shakespeare in high school, and we had a terrible teacher, so I hated it. Unfortunately, my interest in English literature got ruined for many years after that. It's such a shame. Well, when you look at something like this, always look for the MPs and how those MPs affected your teacher, how they affected you, how they were affecting the those deciding the curricula. They obviously had a terrible feeling about these. And as Sarah's even seeing at the university she was at, these individuals making up these wild accusations about nobody could have done that. And a confession there of their inability to comprehend the true brilliance of a white man tapping into the biospirit of our people. That was something truly magical. And that is why so many people find it hard to believe. And rest assured that if we, which we are going to recapture our destiny, if we didn't, they would be saying in years to come, nobody walked on the moon or put satellites in space. That's nonsense. There were no Saturn V rockets. There was none of this. None of that happened. It couldn't possibly have happened. Just like they'll say that there were never white people in South Africa, and that's why there are none there now. So Ohesian Outlaw, super chatting on Entropy as well, $10. Thank you again, dear friend. We are closer to white awakening than anyone thinks. At work, my boss asked for volunteers to go to MLK celebration. Out of 20 people in my work area, everyone rolled eyes. Not one person volunteered.
Good.
Yes, indeed. It's
Good.
very well said. We do have
Collective
a
iron.
couple more over here, and I'll get to the one that is a bit sad here at first. I've seen this myself many times, regrettably, traveling different places. And this is Vicky. No, it wasn't here. It was on the other one. My apologies. And I will pull that up on the other Ko-fi. And we will be there in just a moment. It is somebody. That's the person's name. Somebody super chatting with $18. Thank you so very much for that super chat. And yesterday's super chat last night. This is Jason with $18 writing, Jason, I visited the wealthy part of a diverse city. There were black men with blue-eyed white women. The black men drove Lamborghinis. The young, rich people wore ghetto clothing and listened to rap. I feel culture has declined because those on top also are classless. I'm afraid to say that I have been in very wealthy parts of wealthy cities and, in fact, seen the exact same thing that you're seeing. And if you go down to Atlanta, of course, one of the cities in the South that was marvelous before burnt to the ground by the United States after we lost the war for Southern independence and then rebuilt as the New York of the South. There are sections of that city where non-whites are so wealthy, it is jaw-dropping. And regrettably, you do see that even with all of their hyper ethnocentrism, they'll still take themselves a white woman here or there for as long as they'd like. A woman who will put up with whatever they're willing to dish out as long as she can gain access to the status of the wealth, the Bentleys, the Rolls Royces. I mean, Bentley sports cars, absolutely just disgusting. So sorry, that is dreadful that you had to witness that. It is a despicable reality of this anti-white age, and this is one of the many reasons that we are going to be able to recapture our destiny. So many folks are seeing that while we continue to drive around beat up pickup trucks and going to work every day and making the lights stay on and the water work. These folks are living, as we say down south, high on the hog and having fabulous lifestyles. And in most cases, these people are not, in the vast majority of these cases, these people are not like rap stars or sports stars. These are the recipients of government contracts for non-white selected businesses, grants, and things of this nature, massive sums of taxpayer dollars. That's exactly what's happening. They are fabulously wealthy, and this, of course, may or may not be true. Research for yourself. But they bring these businesses sometimes into existence for a very short period of time, get a massive taxpayer buy from the government to do X, Y, or Z, and then poof, the company is gone. Or they then sell it to somebody who has some competence, and they have the contract already from the government. They'll work it for a while, make a little bit of money before the government revokes the contract when they find out that it is not one of our specials that is in charge anymore. So thank you very much for that super chat. MPC162 also super chatting. Did I read this earlier? Jason, I'm very impressed. You can work a job and do white well-being. So many people in our sphere spend all profits on themselves without a job. I commend you for supporting yourself and funding White Wellbeing with donations. How do you find the time? Well, I burned the candle at both ends, my friend. I burn it at both ends. But thank you so very much for those kind words and acknowledging and appreciating the time and effort I spend. I tell you, the joy I get from seeing the white children, like we had the little girl write the note to her mother, and others we had, you know, when I talk about the kinds of folks that are going free and have the wonderful things happening in their lives as a result, I seem to be missing these folks. Like we had the Jared, remember this gentleman who said in a relationship with a girl, everything was fine, but she would not go free. She would not embrace white well-being. And so he could foresee that in the future, this would be a disaster. They would have children. They would be pulling the children in different directions. He had to break it off for her. So we saved him from a lot of hurt and his children from a lot of hardship and pain that they would have experienced. What about these women who have written in and have left abusive relationships, psychologically abusive, physically abusive relationships, because they are now going free and they finally have the strength to get away from those environments as well. So there's a lot of things that I see, and it fills me with energy. It fills me with hope. And it is the payment to me that I get when I'm working through the night and my eyes, I'm lucubrating. As HB here, he hates the word. And my eyes are bloodshot and I'm working. It's those realities, those moments, those thoughts that come to my mind that really fire me and keep me going. And that's the same thing you all can use. Nothing special about me. These are just exercises, tactics that every single one of you can use to achieve the same or better. And I put that challenge to all of you. Thank you both. Somebody in MPC 162. MPC 162 been showing up a lot lately with comments and questions and super chats, and we really appreciate that. SSIII just came in with a super chat as I look over at the screen of $14.88 and writing, "Hail victory, brothers." Amen to that. Seaver's asking about the spelling of the Eindelen. I'll post it back up there in just a moment so people can write it down and keep it for memory. I think, do we have any other super chats over here?
Syrup, tetragonal tetrahedron.
Oh, tetragonal. No, I think he's looking for the name that we from Prometheus Rising.
Yeah,
looking for. So I will show you the bizarre spelling that I have given.
It's not saying it all as one word. What's that? It was a tetragonal tetrahedron.
Yikes.
Yes.
How long did it take you to learn that, Jared?
Well, I learned it from my friend here. It's a little, it's a kite, trapezoid shape with
I've seen the shape.
Kites on it. It's a shape that has significance in Jason's book.
It's a very pretty shape, actually. It reminds me of like a, I don't know, mineral or some sort of crystal or something.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah. We also have, let's make sure we have so many places to check now. I want to make sure, I want to mention everybody who has become a member, channel member during the show. We had Watch Rider became a member, Roy Danton, Sonnenrad, she got a pink socks, Hansa. No, the Hansa was gave a donation. Got that one. The Golden Gladiator became a member. Great name. Let's see. I'm making sure I have all of these super chats as well. The Great For Null, who did a magnificent clip of me from last night. It is hilarious, but it really drives home the point that we really need to make when it comes to this craven attitude of everyone bunching up into some little area of houses and just waiting for the government to come and kill all of us. We need not to follow that line of thinking again. And he took the opportunity to make that brilliantly. 41 BMC became a member of the channel today. Thank you so much. I think that covers all of our super chats. It has been absolutely splendid having you on, Sarah. Why don't you give us your final thoughts? Tell folks where they can find you, and then we'll hear from Jared.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. If I've just got 2 seconds, can I just respond to one of the super chats? And thank you for all of them. They were lovely. Forgive me, I can't remember. I think it was Roy Danton, but if it's not, forgive me. I didn't quite catch the name. But the gentleman at the beginning who said that Shakespeare had been ruined for him by his horror teacher. Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear about that. I would say to you, though, don't forget that Shakespeare's it's actually meant to be watched. So, I mean, you should go and maybe go and watch it at the theatre, because sometimes when you're actually reading the text, it's so dense. And I find it dense and difficult when you see this huge tome in front of you. You just think, oh, Lord. So don't forget that you're meant to enjoy these things. So go and see one of the amusing ones, like Measure for Measure is a good start because it's short and funny, or Much Ado About Nothing. Or one of the really kind of juicy ones like Macbeth or Hamlet. Just try and enjoy watching it. And America is very good. In fact, you've got better Shakespeare companies than the Globe. Really, you've got some really awesome actors and actresses. So that's all I would say. Don't give up on that. Apart from that, thank you for having me. Yeah, I just have a channel. It's called Daughter of Albion. I need to create an email. Actually, I haven't got that up there yet because people have been asking how to contact me, but I will do that tonight. Apart from that, I think I have an Instagram, and that's it really. Yeah. But thank you for having me. It's been lovely to speak with you both.
It's been our pleasure. Mr. George, where can folks find you? And then I have a couple more super chats and to read, and we'll sign out.
Okay. Yeah, someone in the chat was saying they still do the Viennese waltzes. I am aware of that. Yes, I'd love to attend one day. Go to.
They look stunning, don't they? Look beautiful. Yeah,
they sure do.
Yeah,
I would love that.
Yeah, those are the things that capture the imagination.
They certainly are.
A bit of housekeeping. See down there, Jared George. I was commenting, I was chatting in the chat over the last few weeks, and I realized some new people might not realize that when they see the Great Order on the screen and they see Jared George commenting, maybe they would just think Jared George was a moderator with a wrench or something. Most of my social media is the Great Order as a handle, but my original YouTube channel was deleted back in June on that fateful day of the Vox adpocalypse. So yes, I am Jared George here on YouTube. Most of my social media is the Great Order, but where can you find that all? Well, on my site, thegreatorder.com. Easy to remember, right? So all of my activity is cataloged there. So please do check that out, and you can get in touch and find the different social media accounts you can follow on any relevant social media platforms you're on. And then, of course, the same holds true for the afterparty.tv. So please do check out me and Jason's individual sites. But the afterparty.tv is a little bit different because it really focuses on all the media that comes out of these shows. There's media from you, the community, like Fornull, who was here tonight. We were talking to him a little bit in the chat. He's a musician. And for example, we have some of his work on our site on the community page because we really do want to make it interactive. And of course, you can watch this very show on the Watch Live Now page. I did change the name of it. So the URL is still Watch Live Now, but it's something else. I'll get it in a minute because people are saying they needed a little more, we need to be a little clearer. So give me a minute and I'll put up, it's something like show info and watch when live. So you can get all the information about how to support the chat. Yeah, show info, watch when live. Okay. You can see upcoming guests. So please do check that out. That site, theafterparty.tv, is the easiest visual way to kind of scroll through the whole catalog of what we've done. We still have some more things to put up, but we're getting close to having all the different streams and some selected solo videos, places Jason and I appeared when we were interviewed elsewhere on someone else's platform. And as I said, collaborations and things from the community as well. That is the hub. And increasingly, with social media being what it is, that is where we will be encouraging you to watch these shows when live. We know most of you still do it on YouTube, and I can understand that old habits are hard to break, but please do get in your head, YouTube is likely not going to be around for too much longer, and we need to be able to be nimble and move with that. Also, do please sign up to the newsletter as well. That's the way for us to keep in touch. So that is the housekeeping, but we had a wonderful chat here with Daughter of Albion. Sarah, it was wonderful to speak to you, and I guess the tech gods were kind to us tonight and allowed us to have this full conversation. I'm sure we'll speak.
I know, it was delightful.
Yeah, and I'll give it to my friend Jason now to take us out.
Okay.
Well, thank you, good sir. It has been magnificent and a magnificent audience. First show of membership, and people are loving it. We have some final super chats to read here. Art Acrobats at $1.99 asked if we should change the name to David Curryfield, and of course, by curry he means to curry favor. So thank you so much for that, Art Acrobats. $1.99. Frodo Underhill Super chatting $4.99, writing, kings are today weak because they aren't sovereign. There is no pressure. If you are in charge, you have to deal with the consequences. And again, super chatting this time with $9.99. Thank you so much for Rodo. And writing, I watched the 1964 unveiling of the Aston Martin DB5. It was so classy. The Queen went from ruling an aristocratic white empire to a small multicultural state. Complete failure. Thank you so much. And it does appear to be a complete failure, going from what it was to what it is. Thank you all for being here. Everyone who super chatted, a big thanks to all of you, of course. Everyone who became a channel member as well, a big thank you to all of you. Everyone who commented, watching now live, or those who watch and replay, I deeply appreciate that. Jared, George, and I absolutely love you all and are grateful that you show up, especially if you are new and you're kind of unsure about this. This is not those from the anti-white narrative that you've learned about. You're not going to see any of that here. We have our own story that we are penning ourselves. So leave that baggage at the door. Take a fresh look at the gentlemen who are in front of you, the things that we are saying, the act of going free, the verb of going free, and freeing yourself of these mean pathogens, becoming a better you so that we can have a better community that will serve to protect you, your children, and all of those to come. Let me thank my moderators who were here today, the great Seaver, and of course, Spartan Warrior Queen, an intrepid duo as ever one could find. Thank you all so much for the good words. I see McDonald saying something about Streamlabs. Oh, there is a Streamlabs.
Yeah, I just caught that.
And that says $17.76 by Johnny. And thank you very much for that, and grateful that Streamlabs actually auto-updated that time. I didn't have to keep clicking on it. NWG and Jared, do you agree on a never talk to mainstream media policy? Is there some unique scenario in which you feel it could be possible, if live or through email only, if paid a lot of money to do it? Well, the reality is, of course, as you have seen, everybody who has tried to go into their sphere and spoken to the media comes out depicted as the monster from the anti-white narrative. There's no way around that. And this idea that we could simply record it and then we'll put it out on our media later is really flaccid as could possibly be. They're going to broadcast the interview, say someone of some relevance. They're going to broadcast it to a great many millions of people. It will be cited. It will be cited for articles. It'll be cited for magazines, newspapers, even, and then those citations will be used in essays, both collegiate, high school level as well. It will live. It will have legs and go wide and far. But the person, even if they have 60,000, 100,000 subscribers, who says, well, I'm going to show them and I'm going to put the whole video up, they're not going to reach anybody. It's not going to have legs. It's not going to have any meaning whatsoever. Now, having said that, there may be some creative scenarios, just like everything we do here is very different, undermines anti-whiteism, protects our people from their efforts to inflict this injury. There may well be ways to conduct interviews. In fact, I have manipulated the media in the past. I have, and maybe we'll have a going free and I'll talk about some of the things that I did, but I manipulated them into telling the stories I wanted them to be able to tell by tricking them, pitting them against each other, and generally just being a hell of a lot brighter than they are. But so there may be ways, and I don't know if Jared wants to add anything to that, but I deeply appreciate the contribution of $17.76.
Yeah, not much. We both received an email correspondence about this infamous CBS interview that some producer was trying to do with some in our circles, and I didn't respond. I don't think Jason did either. I never say never, but as a rule of thumb, right now I have a no media policy unless there's a really extenuating circumstance. Yeah, there's no reason to say never. You could think of a unique scenario like Jason said, but in general, it's not a good idea. We'll leave it at that for now. And I will say, yes, the Aston Martin is superior to the gaudy Bentley sports cars.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for the question, and thank God I saw it. But remember, if you all ever give a super chat with a question or a statement and we miss it, we'll do our best to make sure we read it the next time we come around. Let me spotlight a few people as we get ready to tap out here on the after party. I saw Thomas Lee in the live chat today. Polygon, Anglosaurus Rex. I like that name. That's fantastic. I saw Alan in there. Very common name in the UK. Hello, Alan. I saw somebody that goes by the name 555. Thank you so much for being here. Transcend to 0 Point. A big spotlight and a salute to you. Saw you in the live chat today as well. Folks, we have a deep love here in service to White Wellbeing, and we cover a lot of different topics. Especially here on TAP, we talk about a lot of different things. We bring folks like Sarah on to talk about their background, where they came from, and how they are moving toward a healthier world, a healthier idea of going free, a healthier lexicon, healthier dialectics, making this big change, making this big transition from something that has, for way too long, been a defense that was too weak, too inept, and not targeting specifically the target that is on us, and that is this psychological warfare. So we need to remember at all times that when we talk with our friends, family, and relatives, that we are talking about love. We are talking about our people. We are talking about protecting who and what we are. We don't speak with the language that the anti-whites have given those that they hate. We don't speak with the language or the dialectics of the bad guy in their narrative. We speak with love, we speak with passion, and I guess to try to improperly, I'm sure, cite Shakespeare, love is a, how does it go? Love is a spirit all compact of fire. And that's what we have here on Going Free. So folks, it's been a marvelous show, and we look forward to seeing you all again next time.
Bye.